Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 22. Stace had been spending most of his time sleeping, but that didn't mean he was a particularly deep sleeper at the moment. The constant aching of his legs stopped him from getting meaningful rest. He had to go for quantity over quality. That was why he awakened almost immediately to the feeling of a finger gently circling, teasing one of his nipples. His eyes snapped open, revealing Ella lying next to him, also awake. Before he could say anything, the large woman removed her hand, a finger coming up in a shushing gesture against her full dark lips, framed by two white tusks. She pointed to Stace's other side, where they could both hear Iing softly snoring. Then Ella licked the tip of one long, purple finger and brought it back to his nipple, continuing to tease with the moistened digit. It had been a long time since Stace had been physically intimate with anyone, even himself. He had sort of given up on it years ago. Perhaps that was why his skin felt so flushed, why he felt so sensitive. A whimper wormed its way out of him, and he raised a hand to grip hers. She kept on teasing, fanning her fingers out to drag them along his pale skin, and his hand just sort of came along for the ride. When she leaned over and ran her rough, inhuman tongue along the helix of Stace's ear, he couldn't help it. He moaned. Iing rolled over, an arm draping over the human's chest, and his voice came out in a sleepy, half-awake drawl. "It's okay, Stace. You're okay." The snoring returned almost immediately. Did Stace really moan in his sleep so often that comforting him had become a reflex? Regardless, Iing's arm neatly protected him from Ella's teasing fingers. On his chest at least. Those fingers instead traced his abdomen, faint touches that left tingles in their wake. Her teeth pinched gently at his earlobe and Stace gasped. Iing's arm tightened more snugly around him. His mind seemed to be locking up. Stace didn't want to wake Iing, but he couldn't help the noises Ella was forcing out of him. "Do you want me to stop?" The words were so quiet they were almost inaudible, accompanied by a hot breath that tickled Stace's ear. He honestly didn't know how to reply. He just lay there, breathing hard, shuddering at the sensation of her fingers playing across his skin. When he felt the hard, smooth surface of one of Ella's tusks on his neck, Stace froze up, but it quickly turned into a whimpering moan as the rough surface of her long tongue made its way up his throat. He was completely oblivious of the fact that Iing's snores had stopped. When Iing's hand started moving, nimble fingers finding a nipple and pinching it, Stace couldn't hold in the noise and let out a very emasculating squeak. He turned his head and found himself staring directly into Iing's black and gold eyes, a smirk framed between his small tusks. When those plum-colored lips parted, the words weren't directed at Stace. Iing's eyes flicked over towards Ella. "You know, I think I can see the appeal of having a nice masculine guy to toy with. This is all sorts of fun." "I know, right?" Ella's lips found Stace's earlobe again and his whole body shuddered under the pair's attack. Finally, Stace managed to whimper out a word, his shill barely understandable. "Why?" Iing's hand slid up and up until it was pressed against Stace's cheek, fingers idly scratching his beard. "Because we like you, dummy." Stace finally managed to move again, raising an arm, trying to reach across his body to touch Iing's cheek in response. The muscles in his chest spasmed as he overextended, clenching and cramping, and the hiss of pain was not the sexy, sensual noises he had been making before. The moment was broken, and immediately the two Shilvates' attitudes changed. "Stace? Are you okay?" Ella grabbed his arm and moved it into a more comfortable position. The intimacy, the sexiness he had been deluding himself into thinking he might have, was gone. The game was over, and Stace was back to being useless. He couldn't even be a fucktoy correctly. He felt broken and wasted. Stace tried to turn his head away, to hide, but they were on either side of him and he couldn't escape. He couldn't even move on his own. It was all too much. Stace began to cry. They had tried to comfort Stace, but he kept trying to pull away and fight, sobbing all the while, getting more frantic. Elora decided that what he really wanted was to be alone, so she grabbed Ian and dragged him off the bed, taking a moment to tuck the trembling human in tight. While Stace quietly sobbed to himself, the two sat at the table, Ian on the stool and her in the chair. That could have gone better. Ian sighed. I don't get it. Guys like being pampered and played with. I know humans are weird, but still. Elora was frustrated. Her first real chance with a guy and it had backfired. She was trying to ignore her very damp panties and instead focus on their human's problem. Sex could wait. Hopefully. I think Stace just doesn't like feeling helpless. He was really into it until he realized he couldn't reciprocate. Everybody likes being pampered. So what can we do? The plan had been to show Stace that he was safe, protected, valued. Instead they had made him feel worthless. Ian thought about it. He needs to feel useful. He needs to be useful. And Stace is far too smart for us to be able to fake it. Elora nodded. He needs to be useful? So let's use him. Ian stretched, feeling his back pop. The two Shilvati had slept on the floor next to the fire, giving Stace some time to himself. It wasn't comfortable compared to the bed, but having Elora wrapped around him was soothing for the both of them. She was already up, working on something on her pad, and Stace was in bed, just lying in place and staring at the ceiling. Good morning, Stace. He didn't reply, just kept lying there. He didn't say anything to me either. Elora waved idly in Stace's direction. He's pouting. Ian walked over to the human. All right, Stace, enough lounging around. It's time to get to work. Before Stace could react, Ian climbed onto the bed and straddled him, planting his ass on Stace's thighs. What? At least Stace was engaging with him, not just ignoring the man sitting on his legs. Ian made a come here gesture with his arms. Up. Come on. We need to get you mobile. Stace stared at Ian. Unless you're just going to be our bed buddy for the rest of the winter. Slowly, painfully, Stace started to pull himself forward. He managed to get up a few degrees, but then he started shaking. Before he could give up, Ian leaned forward and put his hands on Stace's shoulders, pulling gently to remove some weight and providing support until the pair was face to face. Stace's small smile was interrupted as Ian's hand slid up, fingers entwining in the human's hair. He pulled forward and pressed his lips against Stace's in a firm but quick kiss. When he pulled Stace free, the poor guy looked like he was in shock. Releasing the handful of dark hair, Ian started to gently lower Stace back down to the bed. That's one. On their second rep, Stace raised a thin, pale hand. You don't have to. I'll work. Ian frowned theatrically. I know I don't have to, you idiot. I want to. Unless you don't like me. Stace's hand moved to Ian's shoulder, and the next kiss was far more fun. The first time, Stace was too shocked to do much, but this time he reciprocated. Ian was surprised how much passion Stace was able to put into it, lips parting slightly and tongue flicking out to gently, tentatively touch the Shilvatis. He had no idea a human tongue was so soft. It was giving him ideas. When they broke free, Stace smiled. That's two. Of course, Elora had to ruin the moment. Her cheer and clapping turned Stace red and Ian could feel his own face flush. So that ended that. They managed to get another 6 reps before Stace was out of energy, but the melancholy that had filled him the previous night seemed to have receded. Before bed we will start on your arms. Legs we will save for tomorrow. Stace nodded as he laid back, catching his breath. Ian made absolutely no attempt to get off of his human's lap, though he did slide forward slightly so they were pelvis to pelvis. Ian was usually fairly masculine for a Shilvati, taking a more passive role in the bedroom. He and Miriam liked to experiment a bit, but that dynamic was certainly the most common. What he was finding was that he really enjoyed having Stace pinned beneath him, as well as the teasing dominance he and Ellora had used the evening before. Even if the human's strength and strange femininity had been what had initially drawn Ian to him, being on top was fun. Don't wear him out, I still need him today. The teasing in Ellora's voice was obvious. Ian's sigh was so over the top and theatrical that both Ellora and Stace had to laugh. Ah, fine. He reluctantly climbed down off his new pet human. What Ellora wanted him for, Stace was surprised to learn, was a lesson in firearms. The caribou meat was mostly gone and soon they would be back to needing to supplement the rest of the supplies. While Stace was hoping that he would be able to get some fish traps made and do some ice fishing, if he couldn't even manage to sit up it was going to be a problem. Ellora might actually have to go out and shoot something, and her pistol was fairly limited. The baby chair was just as humiliating as last time, but his abs ached and he really had to be at the table for the lesson. Besides, the exercise and unexpected intimacy with Ian had done a lot to improve Stace's mood. Ellora laid out all 3 firearms and all of the ammunition. The strange Shilvati pistol, oversized to his own sensibilities, was next to a slender rectangular stick that looked to fit in the grip. A battery of some kind, Stace figured. The pistol and rifle were also on the table, and from the glint of brass in the cylinders at least the pistol was still loaded. Without his pad, Stace's Shil vocabulary was incredibly limited, but he pointed at the revolver. Empty that. It's not good. Ellora blushed, looking sheepish. I wasn't sure how. I didn't want to mess it up. Ian joined them then, sliding Stace's pad next to his elbow. He smiled in reply, and was gratified to see the young man's grin in return. When Stace gestured to the pistol, Ellora picked it up gingerly and brought it over, making sure the barrel never pointed at any of them. With her holding it out, Stace reached out with his shaking right hand and wrapped 3 fingers around the grip, index finger clear of the trigger guard. He used his thumb to push forward on the cylinder release and, thankfully, he had enough strength to do it. When the cylinder swung free, the 5 brass cartridges dropped out and Ellora let out a little eep of surprise as they clattered to the table. Close it. The pistol is safe now. Ellora gently pressed the heavy steel cylinder back up, and it obligingly pivoted and locked into place with a solid click. With that, Stace scrolled down to the end of his pad and started writing a list of words in English. Trigger. Hammer. Lever. Sight. Magnification. Magazine. Cylinder. He kept adding words he thought he might need, then passed the pad to Ellora. Translate, please. I want to keep using Shil for Ian. So where's the safety? Ellora wasn't sure how she was expecting Stace to reply to Ian's question, but a laugh wasn't it. Safety is don't pull the trigger. The pistol, which Stace called a revolver, was unusual in many ways for Ellora. She recalled seeing them occasionally in the hands of the terrorists she hunted, but the operation of them had been a mystery. Now that Stace had clued her in a little, she had to appreciate how simple and robust the design was. Instead of trying to feed a new explosive charge and projectile into the same chamber, like every other gun she had seen, it simply had 5 different chambers. Pulling back the hammer moved a new chamber into alignment with the barrel and prepared it to fire with a light pull of the trigger. You could also fire it simply by squeezing, which would result in a much harder pull as the mechanism pulled the hammer back automatically. The rifle was far more complicated. There was a tubular magazine underneath the barrel that could hold 7 rounds. If you filled the chamber as well, you could carry 8 total. That meant if Stace went out loaded for bear, apparently an incredibly dangerous local animal, he would only have 13 shots. He was quick to explain that if a bear was attacking and you didn't kill it in 1 or 2, it would probably maul you to death before you got a 3rd shot anyway. The black and white pictures of a bear on the tablet looked cute, but when Stace pointed out they came in sizes up to 700 kilograms, could run at speeds of 50 kilometers an hour, and could easily kill her with a single swipe of a paw, she had to reconsider. Loading the rifle involved sliding each of the large brass cartridges into the loading gate, which lined them up inside the tube. From there, they could be moved up and into the firing chamber by pulling down and then pushing up a lever that wrapped around the hand of the shooter. This also moved a steel bar that pushed back the hammer, so once you ran the lever you only had to squeeze tight and pull the trigger. If you wanted to unload the weapon, you just ran the lever 7 times to remove each round one by one. The only considerations for safety were that you couldn't fire without first pulling back the hammer, either manually or by using the lever, and the trigger wouldn't press unless you were squeezing the loop tight against the stock of the rifle. While both firearms had basic sights where you aligned a notch and a post, the rifle also had a magnifying optic, though it was far more primitive than anything Ella had ever seen before. You had to manually adjust for the effects of wind and how far the bullet would drop as it traveled. Kinetic weapons were complicated, and in the end Ella was left with a grudging respect for some of the humans she had fought in the past. Far more than that, she was excited to see that Ian was right about Stace needing to be useful. As soon as Stace had knowledge to share, it was like he became a different person. He was animated, using both hands to gesture as he explained each mechanism in different ways, making sure that both her and Ian were engaged in the discussion. He occasionally slipped into English without noticing, but his attitude was infectious. By the time he was too worn out to continue, Ella was pretty sure she could have built a human firearm from first principles. It was also obvious how much they would have lost if Stace had died. In an hour, he had not just given her information, but explained it, made sure she understood it, answered questions. Stace was one hell of a teacher. The firearms were cleaned and put away, dinner, leftover hare stew, was bubbling over the fire, and Stace was taking a nap. Ian practically threw himself into the chair before Ella could get to it. Today had been exhausting. Well, that went significantly better than last night. Ella huffed. Better for you. I didn't get to make out with Stace at all. She perched on the stool, which clearly wasn't that comfortable for her. Not that she would admit it. Better for Stace. I think we have him figured out. Keep him busy, keep him engaged. Ian thought back to the confident, considerate teacher that had been so entertaining and informative just a couple hours earlier. I think he might be a little more complicated than we are giving him credit for. Guys have always been complicated. Women are simple. Some tasty food, a nice bed, a good fuck, and we're all set. Ella smirked. You're the high-maintenance ones. This is coming from a woman who wouldn't even deign to wake up and introduce herself after the accident. Ian smirked. Little Mr. Hard to Please wouldn't even get out of bed until she had a man inside her. Teasing Ella was getting to be one of Ian's major sources of entertainment in the cabin. Ella's face flushed first in anger, then embarrassment. Oh goddess, you're right. He has been in me. On the other hand, I suppose your virginity is now in question? Oh, she makes a fun face when she's flustered. Ah, don't bring that up. I can't believe I told you about that. It's not a big deal. Really? I am just getting off on teasing you. I mean, Hell, I've only ever been with Marion. Ella's mouth popped open, then closed with an audible click. A hot little thing like you, and you've only ever been with one woman? I don't believe it. When I saw you back on the station, you were dolled up so cute you could have had anybody there. Half my pod gave you that exact offer. I was about to meet my wife after not seeing her for 2 years. Of course I wanted to look nice. Ian gave it some thought. Shit, I'm going to have to explain all this to Marion. I hope she's doing all right. Ian had been thinking about Marion often. Knowing she was safe and sound was a major boon to his own morale while trapped in this frozen hellscape. How do you expect her to take it? What, showing up alive with another girlfriend and a bonus boyfriend? She's going to shit at your rocks. Girlfriend? Ella's face turned a very interesting shade of blue. End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode, and do all the other YouTube stuff. Visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.